The Washington Post actually does a piece talking about how the United States is waging economic warfare against basically the entire global South. Well, how nice of you guys to finally catch up. In this piece in the Washington Post, they talk about how the United States is targeting a third of all nations in perpetual economic warfare. They were even nice enough to provide us a list of nations that are included. And in that list, you'll see countries like Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, Syria, Cuba, Yemen, Afghanistan, China, Burma, Libya, Sudan, Russia, Belarus, and many other countries that the United States seems to be in perpetual conflict with. And even though they'll give you the long-winded version, the reason that these countries are being sanctioned boils down to basically one of two things. These countries have democratically elected leaders who will not play ball with the United States, and the United States was not able to overthrow these elected leaders, or these countries are communist or socialist countries who were doing so well that they were exposing the fallacy that is the pipe dream of American free market capitalism. For example, the United States had a pretty exclusive oil deal with Iran until a democratically elected president in 1954 named Mossadegh came into office after the voters chose him. Not only was Mossadegh popular, but he wanted to nationalize Iran's oil supply, which meant that the United States and the UK could no longer take advantage of Iran. But it really wasn't so much animosity towards the United States and the UK. He just wanted to do what was best for his country. So the US couped him and expelled him from the country. And there's been a constant back and forth between Iran and the United States and the West until Iran finally got control of their government and their oil supply. And after that, they've had sanctions on them ever since. We can look at North Korea as another example, which had the fastest growing economy in the world after the Korean War. As you can see here, communist North Korea had a better economy than capitalist South Korea. And just coincidentally, at the same time, the entire Western world decided to sanction North Korea because it was trying to curb its nuclear weapons program. Now remember, almost every country in the Western world had nuclear weapons at this point. So this actually doesn't make any sense. But really the rhetoric was they have to stop communism at all costs, and they have to save people and prove that communism is horrible by putting sanctions on these countries, starving the people, and straining their economies, because apparently communism can't fail on its own. And of course, by now, everybody is familiar with the Cuban embargo. And of course, you all know that they blame Fidel Castro and the fact that he had a communist government and that he was a quote unquote dictator as to why they implemented the embargo. But what they don't tell you is that it actually had nothing to do with communism, because their puppet, former President Batista, as you can see, is pictured here with Marlon Craig, an army chief. And he was doing whatever the United States wanted and allowed the United States to do whatever they wanted to Cuba's economy. It was effectively a territory of the US. That was until this man, Fidel Castro, came in, overthrew the United States puppet government, desegregated the country. Oh, and by the way, it's probably should be noted that Cuba was desegregated before the United States. Then after he took over the economy from the West and gave it back to the Cuban people, he spent the majority of his time and resources working with countries like South Africa to free them of US imperialism, as he worked on the side of Nelson Mandela, freeing South Africans from the apartheid, while the United States was working on behalf of the apartheid in order to maintain it. And they tried to paint Fidel Castro as this evil dictator who was doing bad by his people. But under Fidel Castro and communism, Cuba managed to achieve a 99% literacy rate. 53% of the seats held by national parliament are held by women. And despite the crushing sanctions the West tried to put on Cuba, they've made such medical advancements that they've literally managed to put the cure for lung cancer in an inhaler. But what's even more jarring is the fact that the United States put a lot of countries on this list because they claim that these countries make human rights violations and are ran by dictators. So don't y'all think there are some notable names missing from that list? For example, Saudi Arabia is a royal dictatorship and is known for its human rights violations. It's almost like they brag about them. Or how the United States knows that the Ukrainian government has neo-Nazi battalions who've committed numerous human rights violations and helped to overthrow governments in Ukraine. And not only do we not sanction them, but they literally fund them. And then there's Israel and this guy, Netanyahu. Need I say more? By now, I hope it's become clear that these sanctions have nothing to do with a dictatorship or really even communism, because even Batista was technically a self-proclaimed communist. The only crime that most of these countries committed was having the audacity to pursue self-determination and to refuse to engage in the US's and the West's imperial games. Or even more so, they even dared to fight against US imperialism. And everybody knows the worst thing that you could possibly do as a nation is have the unmitigated gall to challenge the empire and stand in between them and their bottom line.